So, this is my book called The Great Gravity Project by me. On the, on the back of, wait, I'll show you later. So, in the future, 1 million years after today, the moon will get ripped up and shredded into a million pieces. When this happened, life changed dramatically. Everyone forgot that the moon had ever been a thing. It wasn't one of those sit down and tell your grandchildren type of thing. No one passed on stories about the moon. Life was going on like normal, but with nothing remembered about the moon. Even the Wikipedia and every other article had been deleted from the world. It is unknown whether the last people to see the moon ever did remember its existence, or they really wanted to consume time making people forget about the moon. Never did anyone dare speak the word. But one person, the old, feeble Mrs. Jones, had found a way to transport back to the past and learned everything about the moon. She never told anybody, though, until the Great Gravity Project came into existence. Then everything changed. In the next page. One day, a fifth grader named Elise was walking to school. She was excited. Her teacher, the nice Mrs. Jones, was going to give a surprise lesson she had never taught before, a new subject even. There was a spring in her step as she walked the remaining 20 feet to the giant 3-story building that was her school. No one was standing in front of the doors. No before-school buzz like always. "Where is everyone?" grumbled Elise, jumping up and down. She stopped for a second, turned her wrist over, read her glowing watch, resumed tapping, and murmured, "Oh, I'm an hour and a half early. No wonder." She hopped for a quarter of an hour, peeked at her watch again, and resumed tapping. She hopped for another half hour, and then stopped abruptly. She made a big show of flipping her arm over and seeing she still had 45 minutes. Then she just became a large heap on a nearby bench. Ding, ding, ding. 3 sharp dings marked the warning bell. Elise grabbed her backpack and nearly sprinted to her classroom. "I must have fallen asleep," she squealed, running out of breath. She couldn't miss her super secret, amazing, awesome, new, unknown, and surprising, and did I mention completely new lesson. She sprinted up the stairs, darted through the door, hurried down the hall, and clambered into her classroom. "All right, class," Mrs. Jones squealed, clapping her hands. "Continue our lesson on gravity." Here there was a collective groan from the class. "Aw, just let me finish," protested Mrs. Jones. "As I was saying," continued Mrs. Jones, building up the suspension, "continuing our lesson on gravity, right before what I have to call super secret fun time." Here there was scattered cheering throughout the room. A kid shouted, "Why don't you tell us?" Mrs. Jones chuckled. "Because if I tell you, you know exactly what it is," she explained, like everyone knew that. "So, who can tell me what gravity does?" asked Mrs. Jones, and thus began the lesson. I will skip exactly what happened during the gravity lesson, because you deserve to be spared the boringness. Now, back to the story. "Class," demanded Mrs. Jones, "put away your paper and your pencil, and give me a nice drum roll." Pencils were thrown and set in desk with a clash. Creak, 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 creak. One desk closed, then 2 desks, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. Drum, 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 drummed the class as exactly as Mrs. Jones screamed. "The new thing we will be doing today is..." The kids let up their hands, silencing the drum roll. "You time!" Mrs. Jones exclaimed. "What does that mean?" chorused the class in confusion. "Oh, brother," grumbled Mrs. Jones. "U time is an educational period where you can do anything you want as long as I can understand its educational value. If I cannot understand the educational value behind it, you may not work on it. It is also known as passion time, genius hour, or 20% time. I thought of personing the name to make it sound more fun," growled Mrs. Jones with clearly fake excitement. "If you want to make it more fun, title your project with a name that represents it well." Elisa thought immediately of her earlier question. What if there was no gravity? How would people react? "Perfect," gushed Elise, beaming. "Just perfect. I'll call it the Great Gravity Project." And thus begins the exciting part of the story. Mrs. Jones slowly dragged her feet across the room, or at least appeared like that to Elise. Mrs. Jones was running at top speed, or at least it appeared like that to Mrs. Jones. Tons of projects related to something Mrs. Jones knew very well: moonish topics. Tide, axis tilts, eclipses, all things kids didn't know had names. One was slightly different. Walk me through it, Joey. How was inventing a word for spreading people has existed for 1,000 years educational? Mrs. Jones inquired. Poor Joey had no immediate response. He knew what he would do. Back to the drawing board. I like it. 2 weeks, but if you can't answer the question, back to square one, Mrs. Jones assured him. She left little Joey scrambling for a quick fix. After reviewing 20 projects, Mrs. Jones practically limped to her desk. Everyone was doing something. Crouched over paper, typing rapidly on a laptop. Sitting there?
Kiddos, who did the primates one last time?
Elise, the most hardworking student in the grade, the school was sitting there? Doing nothing? What was her project, anyway?
Always have it in your title.
Elise sat and sat and sat and sat as Mrs. Jones approved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 projects and limps back to her desk. What was going on? Wasn't she going to approve the biggest, most exciting educationalist important project? Hers? She sat and sat and sat and sat some more. Only this time, Mrs. Jones wasn't approving projects, but sitting down, glancing around, and staring blankly at her. Why was she staring at her? What had she done wrong to deserve this cruel and unusual punishment? If she had thought the day would be fun. So much for that theory. All at once, everything came to the old teacher. She hadn't approved Elise's project. An innocent girl forced to sit tight because of her mistake. Oh, what a forgetful old lady she was. She began to wander slowly over to the back of the classroom where Elise sat today. Elise had just given up now. Her head was glued to her desk. She could barely see anything. Then she saw a flash of movement. A Mrs. Jones-colored flash of movement. Yeah, right, thought Elise. Yet she lifted her head. Slowly. Carefully. And to her great surprise, there was Mrs. Jones urgently walking in her direction. Elise whispered a barely audible cheer that no one but her could hear. At least she thought so. Maybe the day wouldn't be so bad after all. Mrs. Jones kneeled down closely, right next to Elise, and whispered, Now what is your idea? Elise smiled as she began to open her mouth to speak. She knew she hadn't been wrong. She had never been wrong about anything. This would be the best day ever. And she began with a cheerful, My project is... Well, to make a long story short, Elise heartily explained her whole project, making sure to include every tiny, unnecessary detail of information, and in turn, it was approved by Mrs. Jones within 5 seconds. The whole ordeal took about a half hour. Projects whirled, papers flew. Everyone rushed to get projects done like they would do the next day. Mrs. Jones was worried. This was a process, a nice long process. She didn't expect this for weeks, months. Even Elise was gluing things to trifolds and poster boards. Attention, class, Mrs. Jones shouted. Then she yelled it. Then she screamed it. Then she picked up a tiny, blackened, almost invisible stub of chalk and scrawled it on the backboard in her largest, tallest, most notable letters that were just barely neat enough to read. Everyone worked and looked like there hadn't been a peep from Mrs. Jones. Then the most annoying, inappropriate, weirdest, loudest, attention grabbing, unheard of, longest lasting, futuristic, oldest sounding, multidimensional, layered, newest, roboticest, and did I forget to mention annoying, appropriate, weirdest, loudest, attention grabbing, unheard of, longest lasting, futuristic, oldest sounding, multidimensional, layered, newest, roboticest, or annoying, appropriate, inappropriate, weirdest, loudest, attention grabbing, unheard of, longest lasting, futuristic, oldest sounding, multidimensional, layered, newest, robotic, and annoying, inappropriate, weirdest, loudest, attention grabbing, unheard of, longest lasting, futuristic, oldest sounding, multidimensional, layered, newest, roboticus. Continues on next page. Continued from last page. Cell phone ringtone that anyone in the class had ever heard. No one had seemed to hear it though. The first thought that popped into Mrs. Jones' head was, I have no chance of getting the attention of this crazy class. Immediately followed by, no one heard that? Then another sound filled the classroom. The bell. She sighed. She missed the 6.5-hour school days from the long ago past instead of the short 1.5-hour days they had. The moon's disappearance was something she was holding in but bursting at the seams of tongue. Maybe tomorrow. It was, after all, a tale worth telling. The U-Time Project rush was getting hard to control. Wait, if anyone said that, it would be the new understatement of the century. Scraps had said the word moon, eclipse, waves, natural light, and the night were flying. Everyone was learning about made-up fantasies that were once real. They didn't know that. Mrs. Jones would burst. She had to tell. She had to tell soon. The next month. Okay, class, secret time. Get in a circle, Mrs. Jones whispered. The class cheered. Secret time was where the class got in a circle, and Mrs. Jones whispered the secret to the person next to her, and then that person whispered it to the next person. It was like telephone, but the secret was always of too much importance for the saying it aloud part, or the changing the phrase part. Mrs. Jones planned to tell them about the moon. The youth time project had long since been done. She knew it would disappoint the hard workers, including the guy who invented the word moon. She whispered the secret in all its details. A chorus of ahs and reallys made their way around the circle with the old secret. Now they knew. They all did. Mrs. Jones sent another message around the circle for them to tell their grandchildren and have to tell all those they can. Long live the old tale of the moon. Many, many generations later, man on the moon fantasies were told. Stories of eclipses and lit nights were ablaze. Mrs. Jones had long since been dead. Her grave was marked with the words, "The start of a new and better nation." And thus she had been, keeping the secret long after all others. And then this is a dictionary of some of the different things that would be different without the moon. There would be no tides, shorter days and longer years, unstable axis tilt, no eclipses, no man on or in the moon, much darker nights. And so then I have a little summary of my book on the back, and thanks for watching. Bye.